I get so bored I could scream. I'd like to do just whatever I like.
It's not fair.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Warfair, the podcast by the War Law Institute. Today we are very happy to be joined by Ejaz Haider. Ejaz Haider is a journalist who is an expert in security and foreign policy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So we're here today to talk about the Gaza Peace Plan, and you have the Security Council resolution in front of you right now.
Yeah.
So many have welcomed this, in a way, as being an end to a 2-year genocidal onslaught that we have all had live streamed to our phones. But at the same time, it has been criticized heavily by many commentators, including yourself, about the fact that it's not really going to be the pathway to a credible and lasting peace. So why do you think this? And really, what does the peace plan say?
Thank you, Aisha. One of the reasons we got this print out, because you have an international law background, and you know that these texts are very important. The language is very important. This is not a comprehensive peace plan, because the Palestinian question, which is essentially about the Zionist occupation of Palestine, is not just about Gaza. We also have the issue of the West Bank and Jerusalem. And if we go back to even that UN resolution, it talked about the two states in a particular way. And if you look at the map that was supposed to be as part of that resolution, which unfortunately created the Zionist entity, what is now called the State of Israel and Palestine. And if you place the map now in the year 2025, when you and I are talking about it, the difference is colossal. And it is because the 48 war, the 56 war, when the Sinai and all of that, 67 specifically, and then 73 obviously was an attempt to reclaim territories, but the 73 war was not exactly for the sake of the Palestinian. It was more for the Egyptians to take back Sinai and for the Syrians to take back the Golan Heights and all that. So this one, if you look at the language, it says welcoming the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. So on the one hand, the term used is comprehensive. On the other hand, it's only about Gaza, as in Gaza. So that's one. Then welcoming the historic Trump Declaration for Enduring Peace and Prosperity of 13th October 2025. There's nothing historic about it. I mean, it's actually, if you just focus on it, it's just a small piece of the larger mosaic. And even that small piece is very complex, because unless you fit it into the larger mosaic, you're not talking about a comprehensive or historic settlement. And then the constructive role played by the United States of America. I mean, this is just laughable. I mean, if it weren't so tragic, this genocide and the sustainment by Israel of its military operations simply would not have been possible without the United States of America. I mean, that's what earned Joe Biden the moniker of Genocide Joe. And that has continued under Trump. Even now, the military hardware that's coming into Israel, the US long-standing policy of providing what they call QME, the qualitative military edge to Israel compared to everyone else around. Then, of course, there is the issue of minor sort of, reference to relating to the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. But there is nothing specific in this about the Palestinian question. Then, of course, if there are two parties, and if this is, if we were to take a long shot and say, okay, perhaps this is some kind of stepping stone towards the two-state solution. And by the way, personally, I think, and we can talk about that, it's a chimera. It's something which everyone pays lip service to, but the reality on the ground is completely different. But for the sake of the argument, if we were to consider this as some kind of stepping stone towards the two-state solution, then there are two parties: the Zionists and the Palestinians. The Palestinians are not part of this. They're not part of the Trump plan, the 20 points, or the reflection of those 20 points in this. I mean, the UN Security Council over the last 80 years has come up with lots of resolutions. But this one takes the cake for being the most wishy-washy, completely something which doesn't have any foundations or any plinth. And everyone is trying to put an edifice without having the foundations. Then, of course, since we're talking language, consistent with relevant international legal principles. Now, you're the expert there. I mean, there is an ICC warrant against the Zionist entity's prime minister, who incidentally is also accused of bribery and other scandals within Israel, and recently went on television and asked the Israeli president to pardon him. So the point is, and then there's going to be a board of peace. Then under that board of peace, there's going to be an international stabilization force. We don't know the composition of the board of peace, except the fact that Trump is going to lord it over. But apart from that, there are no details. Then this international stabilization force, which is going to maintain peace. How? We don't know. But we're told that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Fatah and other groups will have to disarm. And they have rejected it, obviously. They have said that any disarmament will have to be on the basis of a Palestinian consensus, a Palestinian governing body. Then there is this whole talk about reconstruction and rehabilitation. Even in that, we are being told that the part that the Israeli occupation forces still control, that's where they're going to start reconstruction, because they're not going to start reconstruction where they think Hamas is there or the PIJ is there or the Fatah group is there. They said, a number of countries, including ours, by the way, are eager to send troops to Gaza. I've written about that. I'm completely opposed to it because as the resolution stands right now, this is going to be a huge blunder because we don't want to end up having to shoot at Hamas or having Hamas shoot at us. We've had a principled position on this issue much before the formation of Pakistan, by the way. The All India Muslim League had a clear position on this. We also, as you remember, Shanawaz was there, the debates, when this whole UN Security Council resolution was being debated and tabled for the creation of the State of Israel, Pakistan was opposed to it. So our opposition goes back, even when we were under the so-called British Raj. So therefore, unless a number of issues are settled, somebody asked Trump about Israel's, Knesset resolution about annexing the West Bank. And Trump dismisses it. No. They're not going to do it. I am telling you, they're not going to do it. Well, what? The issue is Mr. Trump does not realize that it is already occupied. It's already annexed. The Palestinian town. I mean, people like Eyal Weizman, who's an Israeli architect, does forensic architecture, has talked about it. There are a number of other people. B'Tselem has talked about it. Mahsoud Watch has talked about it. And these are Israelis. Right? I'm not even coming to the UN, agencies and the Palestinian NGOs and the rest of the world that looks into this and has been looking into this since, long. I'm talking about the Israeli. I mean, the B'Tselem has come up and said Israel is committing a genocide. So my point is that without actually looking at this situation as an honest broker, the United States cannot play any constructive role.
Yeah.
And whatever is contained in these pages is neither here nor there. Except one positive thing, that there's a ceasefire, even though there have been more than 80 violations, and Israel continues to kill Palestinians in Gaza, as it does Hezbollah in Lebanon, as it does people in Syria. So Israel is basically continuing with its war around the region.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I kind of want to pick apart the international community's reaction to this and then kind of hone into the actual operational workings of the plan. So when I read this resolution, I'm like, have we not learned anything from Libya and having incredibly vague resolutions there? And the issue that then China and Russia had with the fact that you had no real oversight over what was happening in Libya. You had no real clear mandate. You had no kind of end in sight to where that would end, that armed conflict would end. And here again, we had Chinese and Russian abstention. So Russia kind of floated this idea on the Friday before the Monday, saying, let's have another resolution where the UN Secretary General kind of looks at what we could do in terms of getting a report. No one was really happy with that plan. I can understand why it kind of delayed, kicked the can down the road again. But what we have now is, to me, a Libya-esque resolution with Iraq kind of remnants, which is the reconstruction aspect. And we know that they tried to go into Iraq, rewrite the constitution, try and welcome in all of these neoliberal policies. And that's exactly what this is. It's not from the river to the sea. It's from the river to the Riviera, to Trump's Riviera now. And are you surprised at Chinese and Russian abstention, or do you think that it was just in the face of this is the best that we have? And also the fact that Arab countries, I mean, I think we can only have denigration for the Arab world in the last 2 years that we have seen this genocide, but that they're okay with a very, very wishy-washy inclusion of credible pathway to a Palestinian state sometime in the future. And that Saudi can then just sit back on its laurels and say, but we put that in there and we do want Palestinian statehood eventually, even though we know the Zionist entity has no such plans in mind. And again, the language of occupation is one that is very, very irritating to me. Gaza has always been occupied. There was no disengagement in 2005 to the extent that there was no occupation. And similarly, the language of genocide, I was very late in saying that it was genocide because I know legally how difficult it is to prove. It is not mass murder. It is the special intent of killing. By May 2024, I was like, I cannot say that this is anything else but a genocide.
That's by the way, most of the scholars of genocide have also, they kind of May 2024, in fact, that they said that.
Yeah. And again, I don't think the conflict is genocide. I don't think the war against Hamas is genocide. I think there have been brutal war crimes and brutal crimes against humanity. The deliberate starving of the population, I don't think can fall into any square but being genocide. And so, yeah, I want to talk about the international countries and especially Pakistan's role in this, because Pakistan has welcomed it. It has said that we will be part of the ISF. And you have a population which has watched what's gone on. And as you rightly pointed out, long history of solidarity with the Palestinian people. So what is happening with that?
So partly you have answered your own question. Let's start with the Chinese and Russian abstention and the Russian, resolution. I think it did not materialize because, for reasons that are fairly obvious to all of us, the Muslim and Arab countries were so eager to sign on to this Trump plan. If they had shown reservations, that would have opened up space for the Russians to come up with a script. That's one reason. The other reason is that, which goes back to the plus that I was talking about, I mean, small mercies, that the entire plan was kind of conditional. The ceasefire, was conditional on people accepting this plan. So there was this sense that something has to be done to stop these horrendous attacks. I mean, they were killing 100 Gazans every day. And even though they're still violating the ceasefire, but at least the intensity. Again, look at the irony of my own language and words. The Zionist entity has been allowed to push things to a point where we are now talking about numbers. Oh, there's still violations going on, but at least they're not killing 100 Palestinians every day. They may be killing 5 or 6, Take us back to the trolley experiments and ethics and all of that thing. As far as Pakistan is concerned, what the government is trying to do is that if you look at what the foreign minister Ejaz Haider said recently in a presser, that we will send the troops. But the mandate has to be very clear because we don't want to shoot anyone. We have to be very clear that this is not a peace enforcement mechanism. This is a peacekeeping mechanism. Now, if you take a Puritan view, this statement is, we should have maybe clearly said, listen, we don't want to get into this because this is a non-starter. But if you look at it pragmatically, where for various reasons, for your own national interest and other reasons, not just vis-a-vis the United States, but also vis-a-vis the Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE, you cannot say no upright, but you try and then kind of circumvent the problem. And so you say, listen, we will deploy, but then you have to fulfill X, Y, Z conditions, which is essentially in a roundabout way of saying that, well, we possibly cannot deploy as things stand. So I think from a pragmatic, realpolitik view, I think that's a good position to take. This issue is now hanging fire because there's no real movement on it. Trump also is someone around whom you can't really structure your world because he has the tendency of hopping from one issue to another issue. He's once again now involved with the Ukrainian thing, and nothing has really come out of that. So he'll probably at some point hop back to the Gaza issue. Until that happens, things are where they are. And Trump, if you go back to Trump's first tenure, he was the one who selected people who created the conditions that in a major way led to the October 7th attack.
Oh, what do you mean?
I'll tell you. David Friedman, he selected, Orthodox Jew, to be the US ambassador to the Zionist entity. David Friedman was openly aligned with the Israeli right wing, including Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. There are multiple pictures of them together. David Friedman lobbied, along with Jared Kushner, for the United States President Trump, to recognize the Israeli occupation of Golan Heights, which the United States did, to get the United States to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to shut down the Palestinian Authority office in New York, right? And to allow funding to go for illegal settlements and outposts. All of this is a matter of record. So, and then, of course, there was absolutely no oversight of what the Israeli government was doing in the occupied Palestinian territories, creating those Bantustans.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, Eyal Weizman, Weizman has done a lot of work on this. His argument, which is obviously absolutely spot on because he's looking at the ground, the map, and he's an architect, he does forensic architecture, that there's a deliberate policy of situating the settlements in certain places and then creating a network of roads that link the settlements with ease of communications, but at the same time, basically separate the Palestinian Bantustans from each other.
Right.
So if you have to go from point A to point B, which physically speaking or geographically speaking should take you not more than 30 minutes, the Palestinian will probably take an entire day, depending on the situation.
Creating a labyrinthine
Absolutely,
process.
with multiple checkpoints. And there's an Israeli NGO called Makhzoom Watch. Makhzoom is for checkpoints, is the Hebrew word for checkpoints, who have documented what happens at the checkpoints. So we are talking about an issue where, I was reading Ilan Pape's latest book, which is titled Israel on the Brink. And he has, among other things, he has a wonderful point about US brokered negotiations. And his argument is that the US comes in, brokers something, which Israel then reneges on. And until the next time when the US comes in to broker something again, it never holds Israel accountable for what it agreed to and then violated the last time round, and begins to start negotiations by accepting those violations as
a matter of course. Yeah.
As the cost of doing business with Israel. Right?
Just selective amnesia.
So essentially what's happening is that there is, which is the classic salami slicing. You keep slicing the salami until you get the entire salami.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. But the interesting thing is that back in, I think, 2019 or 2020, I don't exactly remember the year, Friedman actually interviewed Mike Pence, who was then the vice president. And Mike Pence said to him, he said, listen, up until now, the mistake that the US administrations have been making, various US administrations have been making, that they gave to the world an impression that the United States is an honest broker. And Pence said that what we have done, what President Trump's administration has done, is to send out a clear signal that we are not sitting in the middle of the table. We are on the side of the Israelis. So Pence is very forthright about where the United States stands vis-a-vis Israel. And the Palestinians are an afterthought. And then finally, the Abraham Accords. There's a very good book on Abraham Accords by Ilham Fakhro. She's a Bahrani, was with the ICG, and has written this book on how it happened and why it happened and what were the approaches of the UAE and Bahrain and others. Abraham Accords was the idea that the United States could get the Gulf countries and other Middle East countries to recognize Israel, normalize with Israel, and essentially prescind the Palestinians from that. And so Israel was free to partly exterminate, partly expel, partly just simply remain in occupation, force people to leave, and over a long stretch of time, everything will be hunky-dory and Israel will have acquired its vision of Eretz Yisrael, which is the greater Israel. I don't see anything has changed about that. Nothing has changed. That issue is still very much there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bob Woodward also mentioned in his book that Mohammed bin Salman was like, I don't care about Palestine, but my people care, and so I'm kind of forced to care. And I think one of the main concerns of these Arab regimes, I mean, they're not democratic, so they don't really need to answer to the people, but it's the fact that Iran is very popular in the Arab street and the Muslim street generally in its support of armed resistance, and that the decolonized world does see Hamas as a resistance group, albeit one that has committed horrific war crimes on October 7th. And I think it's interesting to look at the role of Hamas in this in terms of the need to demilitarize the Gaza Strip. So you are now having a peacekeeping group, and the US has said no US boots on the ground. Black and brown, largely Muslim, peacekeeping force. And the blurred lines between peacekeeping and peace enforcement always exist in such operations, and it's not clear from the resolution. Going into Gaza and demilitarizing Gaza, but not wanting, as Pakistan, I'm sure that opinion is popular among other Muslim countries, is saying we don't want to.
Indonesia is also a dithering over that.
Yes, yeah. We don't really want to do that. And I find Hamas very, very interesting as a group in terms of their popularity after a genocide. And I think that we keep on seeing Western media try and portray the fact that people are rioting in Gaza against Hamas. And I'm like, you got a few hundreds of people protesting against Hamas. I think that's incredibly low considering what's happening currently in the Gaza Strip.
Let me interject here on 2 points. Your earlier point about Hamas having committed horrific, war crimes. I'd beg to differ on that. And I'll tell you why. One, when this attack happened, there was a narrative that was built about killing and beheading babies, burning them, and raping women, and so on and so forth. That has largely been debunked by independent investigations. As a matter of fact, Haaretz has a couple of reports, investigative reports. In fact, Haaretz was the first that came up with this, about the Israeli helicopter gunships having killed lots of the Israelis, especially at that festival where people were running helter-skelter. Secondly, traditionally, these kibbutzim are populated by people, for the most part, people who have had combat experience in the Israeli occupation forces. They are either currently serving or are part of the reserves, and this includes women. So that's another point. Thirdly, the fighters were not just the Hamas fighters. There was also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There was also the Fatah fighters. Yahya Sinwar is on record as having said that certain excesses were committed, but that was not our intention.
So definitely the media narrative after October 7th was completely fabricated and barbarized Hamas to an extent that it shouldn't have. I'm quite clear in terms of what was a lawful act of resistance, which was going after the IDF forces. That was lawful. The first phase of Al-Aqsa floods. The issue, again, as you referred to, was the success of the campaign, which bewildered the members of Hamas and the other armed groups, which actually managed to break the fences. So the second phase of Al-Aqsa floods, when they went into the rave, they went into the kibbutzim, and I base what happened in the events and the conduct of Hamas or the other armed groups there on a Commission of Inquiry report, which talked about what actually happened and what didn't. And I think that the Commission of Inquiry has been very late in publicizing their reports and doing that on evidence that I can see it tallies with international law in terms of generally the due diligence standards, etc. So I think those were clear war crimes, and also hostage taking is a war crime. Hostage taking, and that is a war crime that was committed on October 7th. That's why I say so. I think it's important from the global South to call out what is a lawful act of resistance and what isn't. And so that's why I say that it doesn't take away from the fact that the collective punishment argument that not every member of the Gaza Strip is a supporter of Hamas. I'm like, but they may as well be. You still cannot collectively punish a population for who they support. And it could well be that Hamas is a legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. We don't yet know, especially now, because I think Hamas has faced 2 years of doing very well in a war, way better than we could have envisaged that they would do on October 7th, in the sense of Israel has fought a seventh front war. We thought Hezbollah would be way better than they were. They got decapitated. Iran also suffered horrendous decapitation strikes too. Hamas was the one that they couldn't infiltrate, largely because of their reliance on low technology. But I think that doesn't, the media narrative about this, I share your concerns about that, but I think it doesn't take away from the fact that both sides have committed war.
Here's the thing. The letter of the law is clear, but the letter also exists in a cold way on a piece of paper. Now, hostage taking, as you mentioned, is prohibited. But when we say that, we're making two earlier assumptions. One is that Hamas or the groups, the resistance groups, are non-state actors and do not connote or denote, whatever word you want to use, state aspirations for their people and the degree of sovereignty. Because otherwise, it would have been about taking people prisoners. In the occupied West Bank, the Israeli law, the age of criminality is 12 years. There are constant illegal raids, doors being knocked down in the middle of the night, people being picked up. The world has now realized this whole idea of collective punishment in Gaza. This has been going on in a slow, structured, violent way in the occupied West Bank for years.
Yeah.
So my point being that in the heat of the battle, when you basically there's going to be a clash of arms, things can happen. I just told you that Sinwar said, may God rest his soul in peace, that certain excesses were committed.
Admitted that they lost control of their forces.
Look at the Algerian War of Independence. Look at
exactly.
These are things that happen.
The FLN committed horrific
absolutely.
Wars. Yeah.
But here's the thing. Who has started this? I mean, there has never been a Nakba for the Zionists. There's been a Nakba for the Palestinians. I mean, Palestinian, again, a matter of record, by Israeli historians like Benny Morris and others, and Ilan Pape. The Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president of the Zionist entity, and David Ben-Gurion. And this fellow Yitzhak Rabin, who everyone credits with the Oslo agreements and all of that. These guys were very clear about how they're going to exterminate and expel the Palestinians. Their statements are on record. My point being that we have to take a longitudinal view of how things have unfolded instead of taking a snapshot view of, I mean, I accept your point as a lawyer, you're going to do that.
I compare conduct to the law.
Sure.
So if a war crime is committed
I look
by
at it.
either
I
side.
look at it in context, which does not mean that I will condone beheading of babies.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
That's
or
a
the
big
taking
no.
of hostages.
On the hostages, I have a different view of looking at it, but yeah, I mean, we can move on to
But in terms of the demilitarization of Hamas and the essence of who will go on to lead the Palestinian people. So Hamas has said we're not really interested, right? We want to have,
and rightly
we
so.
want to say something.
And rightly so.
But they have said that we're not interested. So they don't count. In terms of their popularity, I think it is a testament to the nature of which Palestinians feel that armed resistance is perhaps the only way forward. The Palestinian Authority has been an incredibly corrupt subcontractor for the Israeli regime.
The Quislings.
Yeah. So they are doing an occupation of Palestine by Palestinians at the behest of Israel. And yet they are going to be Mahmoud Abbas as well at the age of...
Well, I mean, this is part of this.
Yes.
But and there are others Marwan Barghouti and others who keep saying. And there's a bit of, this while this whole idea of reforming the Palestinian Authority has a different meaning and context in this resolution and in Trump's 20 points, the fact of the matter is that this authority needs to be just slashed.
Yeah.
Not just, it cannot be reformed. A new Palestinian leadership has to emerge. And the 8 points that Ilan Pape talks about in this book, Israel on the Brink, or what the Palestinians need to say, it's a great book. A bit on the optimistic side, because personally, I think there's going to be a lot more bloodshed, unfortunately, given the structures of this problem. But he's trying to find a way where this can be as painless as possible. So a new leadership has to emerge. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Fatah, and others. These are the groups that have finally put Palestine back on the international stage. It's not the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
And I suddenly remember the point, the second point, about these 50 or 100 or 200 people protesting against Hamas. These are part of, there's this whole diabolical game that the Zionists have been playing. The Israeli occupation forces are actually supporting some of these criminal gangs.
Yes. Yeah.
Inside Gaza.
Who are stealing the aid.
Who are stealing the aid. Who are, and by the way, they are also, by some evidence, being supported by the UAE and the Palestinian Authority.
Okay.
The UAE is playing a very strange role. The evidence and reports that have emerged with reference to the UAE's role in the Sudan civil war, especially their support of the RSF. So these guys are no angels. And similarly, this whole idea of bringing in Jolani, Ahmad al-Shara in Syria, Turkey is responsible for that.
Yeah.
Qatar is responsible for that. Israel is responsible for that. And the United States is responsible for that.
I mean, I think Erdogan, maybe we can spend a few moments on him. I think he totally betrayed the resistance and he betrayed everyone in Syria. And I think he does like to go and cry crocodile tears about Palestinian statehood. And I know Turkey has supported Hamas, like they've treated their soldiers in their hospitals. So they've done that. Perhaps the Muslim Brotherhood link plays a role there. But in terms of what is going to be their role, I mean, Israel has been like, no way Turkey is going to be involved in anything. But so what do you think is happening behind the scenes?
This begins a different kind of back and forth between them, right? Azerbaijan is extremely close to Turkey. Azerbaijan hosts one of the largest Mossad stations in Baku.
Yeah, to watch Iran.
Bahrain has, by admission of the Bahraini government itself, have a Mossad station in Bahrain. I have no reason to doubt that there's not one in the UAE. Okay. So all these states are primarily interested in their own whatever interest that they have. Turkey obviously wants to control Syria. There's Erdogan's War, this book that came out, I think, about 3 years ago by Gunul Tul. It's an amazing book in terms of how Erdogan has used the war in Syria to his domestic political advantage in Turkey. So the man is very sharp in terms of how he is going to perpetuate his rule. And therefore, to think that beyond paying lip service to the Palestinian cause, he actually believes in it or would actually practically do something about it. He might get into a clash with Israel, but that's not going to happen because of the Palestinians. That's going to happen because of his own interest in Syria. What they have achieved through Ahmad al-Shara Why is Ahmad al-Shara not talking about these constant Israeli attacks inside Syria? So something is amiss there. The number of aerial raids that the Israelis have mounted against Syria, they've basically destroyed any credible military capability that the Syrians had.
Yeah.
And the land bridge which connected Iran to Lebanon and Hezbollah,
That's done.
the western pair of that is gone. So that's a big, big, win for Israel and Israel's friends.
Yeah.
And it's also
Not
a
a
big,
small
it's also a big win for the Gulf Arab states.
Yeah. Huge.
Because and I know that they were prepared to even help Israel. They were prepared to even fund Israel to take out the Iranian nuclear capability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Iran is the only country that has actually stood up against the Zionist entity.
And the activities in Syria, I think, are in no small part because of Bashar al-Assad also selling out the Iranians who'd helped him for so long to try and get
listen, when I talk about Ahmad al-Shara, I've had these debates with lots of people. This is not to condone what Bashar al-Assad was. Bashar al-Assad was a horrendous person, as was his father. But the fact is that he had allowed that space, and that space is now gone. And this whole idea about human rights returning to Syria, how much of human rights have returned to Syria?
Yeah. I mean, the Alawites are now getting slaughtered. So, yeah. In terms of final question, before we wrap this up, because I think we could just keep on going for hours about this. Iran, what do you see in the coming months, in the coming years, in terms of Israel taking out Iran? It didn't manage to in June, it didn't manage to actually lead to the downfall of the regime. And I think Iran came out much stronger than I expected from that. But in terms of Iran's ability to keep on supporting armed resistance in Palestine, I think that's probably kind of dwindling now, particularly given the loss of Syria and the decimation of Hezbollah. So, yeah, where do you see that dynamic playing out?
So there are two ways of looking at it. One is, of course, with reference to Iran's own military capability against Israel. The 12-day war, basically gave some very tough lessons to the Iranians. The primary lesson was the intelligence penetration that the Israelis had, whether through people on the ground or whether through technical means, possibly both. So we know that there have been major purges within the IRGC and elsewhere. And recently, Abbas Araghchi gave an interview to one of the Western media outlets, I forget which one, and he was asked this question with reference to the possible potential Israeli attack on Iran. And he said, well, we've learned our lessons and we've emerged much stronger. They have, I believe, been working on certain other missile capabilities, including cruise missiles. And I think they have also purged their ranks of the moles or whatever people that were there. Obviously, it won't be possible to eradicate all of them, but to a very large extent. By the way, the Iranian missile hits in Israel had quite unnerved Israel.
Yeah.
That is something that very few people have talked about. So that is one thing. The other thing is that, I think circuitously Iran would still be helping Hezbollah. But the direct link, as I said, with the western pair of that land bridge gone. But people and states have this great ability to adapt and innovate. So Hezbollah is also has taken a tactical sort of position on going, to vacating the south of Litani River, or doesn't mean that they are not going to come back. They need to reorganize. They need to purge their ranks of any moles. They need to figure out how Mossad and Unit 8200 penetrated them.
Incredibly impressive.
Yeah, that is. I mean,
really
as a student of warfare, I mean, I hate the Zionist entity, but I have to give credit to them with reference to the ability that they have in terms of doing this. And I think they were preparing for a long time. So Hezbollah is also going to reorganize. Hezbollah is going to do many things. I've always said, I mean, I've written over half dozen long pieces on this issue over the last 2 years. And I have always said that these are many battles in this long war. And for anyone to think that Israel has basically emerged victorious, no, I mean, even the Israeli analysts themselves believe that Israel has not emerged victorious. I mean, one thing that we haven't talked about, and perhaps at some point we'll talk about, if you look at the MAGA verse in the US, can you imagine? Can you imagine the split down the middle?
I could not imagine I'd be listening to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens for my news.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So, there are, when these things happen, you have the first order effects, then you have the second and third order effects. Yeah. And, given the immediacy of the situation, we very often cannot figure out the second and third order effects, but they begin to emerge. And they can emerge from such incredible places like the MAGA was.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
To talk about such an important topic. And I guess we'll just end with, may we see a Palestinian state in our lifetime.
Well, there's going to be just one Palestinian state, because I've always said, and that's another topic that we could have, talked about for hours. This whole idea of two states, no.
No, you're one. Yeah.
Zionism has to end. It has to be an inclusive democratic state.
One state.
Just like it was with the Muslims, Christians, and Jews before the Zionist, this evil Zionist creed was sowed in Palestine's soil.
Topic for another day, a whole topic, but we'll get to that too. Thank you so much for watching at home, and I hope you'll tune in for future episodes.